A hospital lobby, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the smell of antiseptic in the air, and a mother clutching a worn teddy bear, her eyes hollow from nights without sleep. This is where our story begins. And trust me, what happens next will absolutely shatter you. Maria Santos had been living in that hospital lobby for 3 days straight. Her 7-year-old daughter Lily fighting for her life in the pediatric ICU after a sudden leukemia relapse. And Maria and her husband Carlos had nowhere else to go because their insurance had run out. Their savings were drained, and the 60-mile drive back to their tiny apartment meant being too far away if their baby girl's condition changed. They weren't causing trouble. They weren't asking for anything except to be close to their dying child. But on day 3, enter Brenda Whitmore. You know the type. Perfectly styled hair, designer sunglasses perched on her head like a crown, and that unmistakable air of someone who's never been told no in her entire life. Brenda was at the hospital for a routine checkup. Nothing serious, just her annual physical. But the moment she spotted Maria curled up on those plastic chairs with Carlos beside her, their few belongings in a small duffel bag, something in Brenda's brain misfired completely. "Excuse me," Brenda announced loud enough for half the lobby to hear, her coral blazer practically glowing under those harsh lights. "This is a hospital waiting area, not a homeless shelter, and I shouldn't have to share space with people who clearly don't belong here." The entire lobby went silent. You could hear a pin drop, and Maria just looked up with those exhausted eyes, too tired to even process the cruelty at first. Carlos stood up immediately, his jaw clenched, but Maria touched his arm gently, always the peacemaker even when her world was crumbling. "We're not homeless," Maria said quietly, her voice cracking. "Our daughter is upstairs in the ICU. She's 7 years old, and we just need to be close to her." But Brenda wasn't having it. Oh no. She marched right up to the reception desk and demanded to speak with security, insisting that these people were loitering and making actual patients uncomfortable, which was rich considering she was the only one complaining. "Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to Rayan Review 2.0 for more real emotional HOA stories." Now here's where it gets interesting. James Mitchell, the hospital security guard who'd been watching this whole scene unfold, walked over slowly. And you could see in his eyes that he'd already made up his mind about who the real problem was here. "Ma'am," James said to Brenda, his voice calm but firm, "these folks have every right to be here. Their child is a patient in our pediatric ICU, and they're not bothering anyone." Brenda's face turned the same color as her blazer. She sputtered something about standards and appearances and how she'd worked hard her whole life and deserved to be in a clean, comfortable environment. Maria, bless her heart, just sat back down and buried her face in that teddy bear, probably trying not to cry in front of this stranger who seemed determined to add to her misery. But Carlos, he'd had enough, and he looked Brenda straight in the eye and said, "My daughter Lily loved going to the park. She loved painting pictures of butterflies. And 2 weeks ago, she was a normal, happy kid. And now she's upstairs with tubes in her arms, fighting to take her next breath. So forgive us if we don't look put together enough for you." The words hung in the air like a punch, and for just a second, you could see something flicker across Brenda's face. Maybe a hint of awareness that she'd crossed a line, but her pride wouldn't let her back down, not yet. She huffed, adjusted her designer purse, and said she was going to file a formal complaint with hospital administration, then click-clacked away in her expensive heels toward the elevator. If you're feeling this story, hit that like button and share this video to support Rayan Review 2.0. What Brenda didn't know was that James, the security guard, had a story of his own. He'd lost his own son to cancer 12 years ago, sat in those exact same chairs for weeks, knew every crack in those tiles, every flickering fluorescent light, and he recognized that look in Maria's eyes because he'd seen it in his own wife's face all those years ago. So James did something beautiful. He quietly arranged with the nursing staff to get Maria and Carlos access to a family room with a couch and a private bathroom, a small space reserved for families in crisis. And he even brought them coffee and sandwiches from the cafeteria. Meanwhile, Brenda made her way to the administrator's office on the 2nd floor, and she laid out her complaint with all the righteous indignation she could muster, talking about liability and hospital image. and how allowing those types of people to camp out in the lobby reflected poorly on the facility. The administrator, a kind woman named Dr. Patricia Chen, listened patiently, nodding occasionally, and when Brenda finally finished her tirade, Dr. Chen asked one simple question. "Did you happen to ask why they were here?" Brenda blinked, confused. Because obviously it didn't matter why. Rules were rules. And Dr. Chen pulled up her computer and showed Brenda the file. Lily Santos, age 7, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, relapsed after 6 months of remission, currently in critical condition. Family had driven 60 miles from their home. Father worked 2 jobs, but insurance wouldn't cover experimental treatment. Mother was a part-time teacher's aide, and they were trying to keep their daughter comfortable in her final days. Dr. Chen let that information sink in, watching Brenda's face carefully. And then she said something that would echo in Brenda's mind for months afterward. "Mrs. Whitmore, those parents aren't camping in our lobby because they want to. They're here because they can't bear the thought of their child waking up scared and alone. And if that bothers you, then perhaps you need to examine what kind of person you've become. Want to hear more life-changing HOA tales every week? Subscribe to Rayan Review 2.0 and never miss the next twist." Brenda left that office shaken, her hands actually trembling as she pressed the elevator button. And something inside her, maybe it was the image Dr. Chen had painted, or maybe it was the memory of Carlos's broken voice, cracked open just a little. Instead of leaving the hospital, Brenda found herself riding the elevator up to the pediatric floor, though she couldn't have explained why if you'd asked her. She stood outside the ICU for 10 minutes, watching through the window as Maria sat beside a tiny bed, holding the hand of a little girl with no hair, tubes everywhere, and Maria was reading from a picture book with a smile on her face, even though tears were streaming down her cheeks. In that moment, Brenda saw herself clearly for the first time in years. She saw a woman who'd become so obsessed with appearances and status and being comfortable that she'd forgotten how to be human, how to recognize suffering in others, how to feel anything beyond her own minor inconveniences. The little girl in that bed, Lily, she looked so small under all those hospital blankets, and Brenda noticed a shelf beside the bed with just a few items. That worn teddy bear Maria had been clutching, a homemade birthday card that said, "We love you, Mommy and Daddy," and a photo of happier times, Lily at a park, grinning on a swing, full of life. Brenda's eyes burned with tears she hadn't cried in decades, the kind that come from shame and regret mixed with a sudden, overwhelming awareness of how much she'd taken for granted. She didn't go into the room, she couldn't. She didn't have the right, but she walked slowly back to the elevator and down to the lobby where Carlos was sitting alone, probably giving Maria some private time with Lily. Brenda approached him, and Carlos looked up with guarded eyes, clearly expecting round 2 of their earlier confrontation. "I'm sorry," Brenda said, and those 2 words felt like pushing a boulder uphill because she wasn't used to apologizing, wasn't used to admitting she was wrong. "I was cruel and thoughtless, and your family is going through hell. And I made it worse, and I'm so sorry." Carlos just nodded slowly, processing this sudden reversal, and Brenda pulled out her wallet and handed him $500 in cash, all she had on her. "For food, gas, whatever you need," she said. "And I'm going to make some calls. I know people who might be able to help with the medical costs." Carlos stared at the money, then at Brenda, and you could see he didn't know whether to accept it or tell her to leave. But finally he took it and said quietly, "Thank you. But what we really need is for Lily to have more time." Brenda nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat, and for the next week, something unexpected happened. She became an advocate, making phone calls to her wealthy social circle, organizing a fundraiser, pulling strings to get Lily access to an experimental treatment trial, basically using all that privilege and influence she'd wielded so carelessly for something that actually mattered. The community rallied, thousands of dollars were raised, and Lily got into the trial. Now here's the beautiful part. 3 months later, Lily responded to the treatment. Her cancer went into remission again. And while the doctors cautioned that it wasn't a guarantee, she got to go home, got to sleep in her own bed, got to paint more butterfly pictures, And Brenda, she visited the Santos family regularly, became almost like an honorary grandmother to Lily, and you'd see her in jeans and a simple sweater instead of designer labels, sitting on their apartment floor playing board games with a little girl who taught her more about grace and humanity than Brenda had learned in 52 years of living. Thanks for watching Rayan Review 2.0, where every story teaches a lesson. Like, share, and subscribe for more emotional neighborhood dramas. The lesson here isn't complicated. Suffering doesn't have a dress code. Crisis doesn't care about your comfort. And sometimes the people we judge most harshly are the ones fighting battles we can't even imagine. Brenda learned that the hard way, learned that being truly wealthy isn't about what you have, but about what you're willing to give when someone else has nothing, and that the most important spaces in life aren't the comfortable ones. They're the hospital lobbies, the hard plastic chairs, the places where love shows up even when everything else has fallen apart. So the next time you're tempted to judge someone based on appearances, remember Maria holding that teddy bear, remember Lily fighting for her life, and remember that we're all just one crisis away from needing compassion from a stranger. And the question is, what kind of stranger will you be?